for many, many years. And if I give a little bit of a backdrop as to this session, it's because we've known each other in the past for you working on different technology and business services arrangements. Do you want to explain what your role today is within Southern Water, and maybe a little bit of history to your background as well?
Okay, thank you very much, Kelly. As I was introduced, I am a solicitor, but I also am a procurement professional. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supplies, and I've been that for over 10 years now. I'm currently head of the commercial and competition team at Southern Water, but I also sit on the procurement and commercial services senior management team. So I hold a dual role within the organization. So I sort of come to these events and conferences and have conversations with people like Kerry without, not as a lawyer primarily, but as a procurement professional, as a commercial advisor, to sort of understand what the market is doing, what people in the market are struggling with, and how to make that better and easier, both from the commercial side, but also from the contracting side, because of course, once the deals are done, somebody still has to put it down on paper and make it understandable to the guys who will then run it. Previous to joining Southern Water, I had my own sort of consultancy, and I did work across both legal and procurement and commercial transactions. And before that, I was the Chief Procurement Officer for West Sussex County Council for 5 years, where I had a team of procurement professionals that I was in charge of. And in that period, we ran a number of competitions for some quite significant business process outsourcing contracts, which is how I got to join the GSA in the first place. I think the biggest of those transactions was as just that contract has just come to an end now. You'll be you'll be interested to learn, Kerry. It actually came to an end exactly 1 month ago. It was a 10-year contract that was worth upward of £750 million and involved triple transfer of 600 members of staff from within the organization to an outsourced BPO provider. So that was a massive exercise then, and we needed all the input that we could find in terms of understanding what the market could do and what the issues were likely to be, which is how I came to meet Kerry when she first became president of what was then the what's called then NOA, wasn't it? NOA then. So she and I have a lot of history in that. I remember doing that project, and I remember her becoming president and tapping her up for as much information as I could get.
Okay, thank you for the intro. So quite controversially in our last conversation, you were saying that there's a hell of a lot that our industry, the technology and business services outsourcing industry, could actually learn from the constructing industry. That's quite a controversial statement. So,
yes.
Because we obviously think that we're brilliant. So where is it we're falling behind, and what would you say we can learn?
Coming from the public sector and consulting as I was into a water utility, which, if for anyone who knows the water utility sector is primarily an engineering company. It's an engineering outfit. Now, 80% of its spend is on engineering and construction. If it gets that wrong, nothing else matters, right? That was a shock to me, because all the things that I had sort of learned and understood and was doing, I had to sort of unlearn some of that within that space. And one of the things that I've come to understand over the last 6 years of being in Southern Water, better than I understood previously, is that when you're looking for a provider, an external provider, to deliver some of your critical infrastructure, you're looking not for necessarily one organization that can do everything, because that is almost impossible to find one organization that is good at doing everything well. They might be very good at doing 50 or 60% of it, but they are almost always rubbish at about 20%. Now, in the construction industry, you cannot afford the infrastructure contractor to be rubbish at 20% of what he's doing. So what you're looking for is either some kind of loose joint venture or consortium or some organization that is willing to be the lead supplier with a good set of subcontractors that it can tap into for those areas where it recognizes that it's not the best in the industry. That is something that the outsourcing industry does not seem to be particularly comfortable with. It's either that the outsource provider wants to do everything, even though it knows that some parts of what it delivers is not the best in the industry, or, as some of the providers seem to do, if they recognize that they're not the best in the industry, they go and buy the company that's supposed to be the best in that industry. And then they make them rubbish because they're now part of that organization. There must be a way where clients like myself can tap into the outsourcing industry and get outsourcing providers who understand where their strengths are, but also understand where their weaknesses are, and where their weaknesses are can find other parties that they can bring to the contracting table. Not necessarily as sub-organizations of them, but as partners that are recognized as experts in that area. And one of the things that works very well with the construction industry, of course, is that for the SME agenda, where you've got tier 1 contractors, multinationals, sometimes the SME is better in specific areas, say for example in design, but they will never get a look in if they're not included as part of a consortium to provide it, to deliver a service to the client. So they get, you also buy into the SME agenda by bringing SME providers along, not by buying them out and making them part of your organization, because then you lose some of the reason why they are the best in their sector, where they're the experts, because they have that ability to be more fleet of foot in terms of innovation and taking risks that big organizations tend to lose. Coming together to work together to be the best for the client is somewhere that the business outsourcing market needs to look more into going forward.
Okay, I'm going to ask our influencer friends whether they actually agree with that sentiment, or whether they are seeing much more sort of like joint ventures and alliances and sourcing ecosystems working. So John, have you seen?
I mean, it's all about collaboration. It's having a supplier ecosystem. In fact, it's not even a supplier ecosystem. Again, it's coming back to understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, and then identifying partners who have the skill sets, capabilities, technologies, or whatever it may be, that complement, supplement, augment what it is you as a business can deliver, and having a best-in-class across that ecosystem in a way that those individuals don't compete. Because if you compete, you're going to water down, you're going to compromise the value that individually you can deliver to that organisation. Mm-hmm. So it's creating that sort of old captain's table, whatever it may be, that you term it. But you need to have clear, it's the strength of the governance model, it's the strength of the vision that you're trying to achieve, and having all parts, all organisations that are contributing to that, pulling together and pulling in the same direction.
But you've seen many positive examples, successful examples of that in our industry.
There are growing numbers of examples in that industry, and I think it's moving away from a procurement culture into a business culture, moving away from a cost reduction into a value outcome will help drive towards that collaborative environment. But it's a mindset thing as well. So if you haven't got the right mindset within the business, you're not going to evoke the same mindset within your supplier base. And it's getting away from being a supplier actually to become a business partner.
Yeah. Right. If I can just jump in there on something that John said that I hadn't mentioned before. This is not about the buying organization seeking to create a supplier ecosystem by sort of forcing everybody to sign up to some sort of collaboration agreement. We've tried that in the past, and Kerry is very aware of one particular one. But I also walked into Southern Water at a point at which their IT platform was based around that sort of, we will set up this sort of separate agreements with different IT providers, and they will all sign up to this one collaboration agreement, and somehow they will collaborate. It didn't work, and it doesn't work. Within a couple of years, the whole system was falling apart. What I'm talking about is about the supply market itself getting into bed with each other, finding like-minded organizations, like-minded people who complement and supplement some of the areas where they're not best in class, and bringing a total package to the table to deliver for the client. It might be slightly more expensive, and it is in the construction industry in many respects, but the value that you're bringing to the table will stand out.
So what else do you think we can learn from the construction industry?
Don't learn any of the bad things.
You've got to share what those are as well.
All right, so one of the bad things is where the sole purpose of creating the joint venture or the consortium is to win the contract and nothing else. And then as soon as you win the contract, somehow you all become different parties and different organizations again. And I had one example of that where we had to renegotiate a particular contract almost within months of it being let. And we went into the room, and there was a consortium of 3 construction contractors, and each one of them had a director and an external lawyer and an internal lawyer in the negotiation room. So I'm sitting down there with my business partner, and I've got 9 people on the other side, all representing the one consortium that won this contract. So the first thing we did was say, no, you go out of the room, you go and sort it out amongst yourself, agree what your position is, and come back in with one lead and one lawyer. I am not having a conversation with the 3 of you because you all bid together for this one contract. I am not starting the contract out on the basis of talking to the 3 of you as if you're separate organizations. I've got one contract, why have I got 9 people in the room? So don't do that, please. If you're going to do it, you're going to be doing it on the basis that you are actually like-minded, and therefore on most things, not necessarily on everything, you're going to agree on the position that you can deal with the client with. Because as we all know, with all contracts, no matter how well procured, no matter how well negotiated when you start out with, and no matter how well written the contract document is, the first day you start out, you will find something that is not quite right, and you will have to deal with it. And that is the process that you will go through, especially if it's a long-term contract like the 10-year one that I was talking about. You know in 10 years, the world is going to be different. What you don't want to do is have to have a conversation with every single one in the ecosystem about what needs to change and why and how. You want to be able to deal with one individual or one set of individuals who can carry everyone else along. One of the things that one of my clients used to say, which is a phrase I don't like using much, is that all the client cares about is that it has one throat to choke. That's all the client cares about. If the client could manage the supply ecosystem itself, if they had the skill set and the manpower and the resources, it wouldn't need you to do it. So why would you come to the room with everybody represented differently? You are doing that on behalf of the client. And there's a price for that, but there's a value in that as well.
Okay, thank you. So is there anything different about the entire RFP process? Any analogies that you could create, or the contracting process?
Not necessarily, because even in the regulated sector, which utilities and public sector procurement is, the rules recognize very clearly that parties can come to the table relying on the skills and the expertise and the financial standing of other parties within their consortium. The rules have already recognized that, because you cannot expect to get best in class out of only one organization for some of the much bigger contracts. So the rules recognize that. And private sector, of course, that's not even a problem, that you can rely on those things. So the contracting process, and I know I speak in ideal terms here, I know that some public sector organizations do contract in ways that you look at the RFP or the ITT and you think, what are they talking about? They have no clue. But part of it is to educate them on that, whatever. If you're getting the consortium bidding, as long as the consortium can demonstrate that they understand what their sort of responsibilities and obligations are as a group, that should not make any difference to the bidding process. In fact, it should add to the value of the bidding process, because then they will be coming to you with things that the value will be immediately obvious over and above the one organization that seeks to do everything on its own. The bidding process should not be different whether you're bidding as a consortium or you're bidding as a collaborative organization or a joint venture organization. And I'm not saying joint venture, go and set up a new company. You can have an unincorporated joint venture where you are still separate companies, you're still competing against each other in other markets, but in the particular scenario you've decided to come together to do things differently for the value that you bring to the table. That should not affect the procurement process or the RFP or ITT process at all.
Yeah, I think it's different in the public sector than in the private sector. So we're seeing in the private sector much more of a consultative RFP process. So rather than issue a specific RFP, it's very much, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve, which goes to John's and Tom's points, is, understand what you're trying to achieve as a business, and then, work backwards from that rather than issue an RFP and end up with something you don't really want. So are we ahead of the construction industry there?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. We're probably about the same. Probably about the same from my point of view. And I'm talking about from a regulated procurement background now, because both utilities and public sector are regulated by the public procurement rules, which, if the current proposals go through as they are, will be a lot simpler and easier than they have been when we had to sort of follow the EU public procurement rules. There is a new public procurement bill going through the House of Lords currently that is trying to sort of simplify the processes that we can follow. Basically, you have one process that is an emergency or urgency situation that you can, basically do more or less what you need to do to get it going, like we had with the COVID pandemic and buying vaccines and that. And then you have one process where, because of the nature of the contract, it's very light touch and there isn't very much regulation around. And the third process is what everybody is going to be using, which basically says you as the buying organization design your procurement process and get on with it. As long as you've designed it, then and it's satisfactory to you and you follow what you've designed, then you're fine. Unlike the old rules that sort of had very rigid structures around, you must do this within X number of days and all of that stuff. All of that is going to go. Now, that's a completely different mindset for the public sector. And people are going to have to sort of shed the historical, this is how we did things in the past, and do it differently, and that's going to take some time. So what you're likely to find is that even when the new rules come into play, possibly end of 2023, most public sector organizations will still be doing things exactly as they did before, because it takes a while for procurement people to sort of get their heads around, I am not bound by those rules anymore, I can be freer, I can do things more openly, I can be more iterative and agile in how I procure. But over time, that is where we'll get to be much closer to what the private sector is doing now.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? And one of the great things, I think, with the new public procurement regs is the Social Value Act and the way that 10% of tenders is allocated now to social value.
Yeah.
I think that's something we could probably learn from in the private sector.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And we'll be talking a little bit more about that this afternoon. So without meaning to lead the witness, does the construction industry work predominantly with much more standard terms?
Yes, to an extent they do. Over the years, there have been very many standard contracts in the construction industry, but in the last sort of 5-6 years, the NEC form of contract is becoming sort of like the industry standard for engineering-based construction contracts. For building, just what we call standard building contracts, the JCT contracts are still hold sway, but there are industry documents that are, as a standard platform for most construction industry contracts. You will straight off recognize what nature of contract it is, and it's almost certainly going to be the NEC if it has some sort of civil engineering or mechanical or electrical engineering base to start off with. But if it's about putting together a building, say like school or hospital or something like that, it will almost be on a JCT form of contract. So the industry sort of, you get past the sort of initial 50-60% of discussions about what contract are we using. Is it a bespoke contract that someone drafted in the organization or something? That doesn't, you start off from, this is what the basis of the contract is. These are the principles that the industry has agreed that the contract would deliver, and then the only discussions to have about the additions that each organization is putting onto those contracts, because as always, people like to put their mark on things. They not always go with the vanilla form of the contract. But
so that must save significant legal time and costs as a result, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely,
it does, because that just, you go out to procurement and you say, we're going to be doing this on the basis of the NEC 4 engineering construction contract. And you don't even attach the form of contract to it, because everybody knows what the NEC 4 engineering and construction contract is in the industry. So you don't even have to put that in there. So that's about 50 or 60 pages of the documents that you don't have to produce, because everyone can buy it for, I think it's £16 now. And you get a copy of the document and as a starting point. And all you then have is, here are the other things that we will put on top of that, or we will take away from it. So you can concentrate on negotiating those other things instead.
Right. Were there any questions for Edward? I've got more, but I just wondered if there anybody. Yeah, Hemant?
Sorry.
On a related note, but to shift gears just a little bit, coming from the blockchain and crypto, evolutionary process, if you like, there is something that they talk about these days called the DAO and smart contracts.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that trend, and what is its relevance to either construction or sourcing? Do you think that's how contracts will be done in the future, through distributed autonomous organizations with automated contracts, or is that just like crypto, just a vaporware?
I think we will eventually get there in terms of automated contracts, because that's the future of just about everything. But we're a long way away from that. There's some contracts now that can be automated to a large extent. If you wanted, for example, to buy 1,000 widgets a week as part of the work that you do, it's almost senseless to spend 2 weeks negotiating a contract for 1,000 widgets. The contract should be basically straightforward, easy, and therefore easy to automate and get on with it. But if you want to build a new water supply works, that's going to cost you £800 million, and the only type of it anyone is aware of is somewhere in Saudi Arabia that has been built once. That is not a contract you're likely to be automating anytime soon. That is a lot of work in terms of design, in terms of organization, in terms of early contractor involvement, in terms of site investigations and all of that. That will to get to automate that is many years away from where we are now. So I think it's a journey. There's some contracts that we can see that we will automate if we haven't already done so. We will automate them soon and quickly, and there are some that will take a while to get around to. We're still struggling with getting some of the construction contracts even signed electronically, because by the time you finish putting the contract together, you're looking at 20 gigabytes of data in electronic form. And to get it through the system, to get it signed electronically is near impossible, because you've got 10 different forms of applications sitting behind it. And you can't merge them into one document. So what do? You print it all out and you ship it by courier round everybody to sign it. But slowly we're getting there. But that will not be automated anytime soon, I don't think so.
It wasn't a plant question, but it was absolutely perfect to move on to what we've got coming up after the break. So after the break, we're talking about GSA standard terms. We believe the industry is ripe and ready for standard terms in its less complex contracts, and also looking at a fantastic platform that actually streamlines the entire contracting process. So please join us again after the break, and thank you very much, Edward.
Thank you very much, Kelly.